I do think it's more and more about like cultivating this. We don't know the outcome, but we know what we need kind of from ourselves and each other to feel grounded and to feel connected. I think this is more what it is really truly about. And there's so many different ways of doing, like connecting to each other, connecting to oneself, and it's super individual. But I think this is super important to know also like within your body. And, you know, like the body tells you if something feels off. And I know we all have had this experience, and coming again back to the experience of my studies, when I felt like sitting in the classroom and I felt in my body like my brain is not even absorbing the information because it doesn't, like, I can't connect to it. Like, I can't connect to it, like, at all. And I think this is, like, when now in my work where I feel like I'm connecting to things I'm doing, like, I'm understanding them beyond a cognitive level, I do feel like I'm moving in the right direction, again, in quotations, and I have no clue where I'm going. And I kind of feel like it's time to embrace it as well as a society, to like think less about like where are we going, what's the outcome, and more like how do we feel doing it and how do we relate to each other.
Designing the future is essential for shaping the world we want to live in. That's why it's more crucial than ever to be strategic about it, think long-term, and embrace complexity rather than avoid it. The field of strategic design is growing, and as two strategic designers, we want to explore how it's changing the way we design products, buildings, organizations, and landscapes. In this podcast, we'll interview strategic designers and professionals in the field, hoping to enlighten both ourselves and others about the future of designing with a strategic mindset and skill set. We're Emily and Isaac, both strategic designers with different backgrounds. Isaac is an industrial designer from Finland, and Emily has a business background in design culture and economics from Denmark. Join us for today's conversation with our guest, where we'll be unfolding strategic design. Welcome to the 10th and final episode of Unfolding Strategic Design. Today we're meeting Alex Wolf, founder and lead strategic designer of Realutopia. Alex is a strategic designer, narrative crafter, and systems thinker dedicated to transforming the way we understand and shape the future. Working at the intersection of storytelling, systemic change, and regenerative design, she helps mission-driven organizations navigate complexity and craft narratives that challenge dominant paradigms. She is the founder of a small Berlin consultancy, Realutopia, and has contributed as a founding member to projects such as the new European Bauhaus Prize-winning Transformation Lab and Network of Empathy. Rooted in intersectional feminism and social justice, her work explores how storytelling can rewire systems, foster deep interconnection, and open pathways to equitable, regenerative futures. Welcome, Alex, and thank you so much for joining our podcast. To a start, could you introduce yourself to our listeners, explaining who you are and what you do for a living?
Okay, hi, I'm Alex. I call myself a systems change facilitator and strategic designer. And I'm the founder of Realutopia, a small consultancy, as you already introduced. And I would like to see Realutopia not just as a consultancy, because I feel like also I'm struggling with the word consultancy.
Yeah.
For me, it's more, I guess, in the beginning, it was like the name for the umbrella of my work, because my work is really diverse and it's interdisciplinary and it fits a lot of different things. So yeah, in the beginning, it felt like me as a person as like not adequate to hold all of these different things. Mm-hmm. So my work, I feel like it's shaped by three containers. The first container is co-design and facilitation. So specifically bringing people together from different disciplines to work on systemic challenges together, and that like people that which usually don't meet, such as activists, policymakers, scientists. So I'm really interested and intrigued by understanding how these people can come out of the silos and share knowledge, and also find ways like actually to implement this knowledge to overcome current systemic challenges, paradigms, etc. So it's something I'm trying to move more and more towards. This is something that we did in the Transformation Lab that you just mentioned. And that's something that interests me a lot. And in general, like facilitating workshops, process design, etc., to be like more simple. This is the one container. The second container is narrative work, where it's about really understanding what kind of narratives, and like it also in terms of like storytelling, like how can we also make an alternative regenerative future or other types of systems that we might not be able to imagine yet and not think yet. How can we make them graspable? And for this, I work with film. My partner is a filmmaker, and we work together on a project right now to go beyond like pitch decks and like, cognitive transmission of something else, and see how can we use film, like specifically docu-fiction, so actually documentary formats, non-scripted documentary formats to make the work of people in the field that is already done more tangible. So you see how I struggle right now to explain what I do. So I would love to just like show a film or show something like an artifact of the spaces that I create or that other people create and how it actually feels to be there. So this is a second container. And the third container is actually one-on-one work with people who are in between this moment when they understand, actually not this. This is not what I want to do anymore, or this is not how I want to contribute or reproduce the current system. And I want to move towards something else and ask what then. So often, by chance, those are neurodivergent people actually who understand actually it's not like this anymore. But in general, people who want to move more towards a regenerative form of living and working. And this is the third container. So I hope I explained it well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we will dive into those later on then, because that's super interesting. I have a lot of questions about your different containers of work and directions. But let's go a bit back to the beginning. You have an educational background in international business administration and European studies. How did you go from that to becoming a strategic designer?
Okay, I'm going to start in the very beginning, I guess. So the very beginning is actually business studies and my feeling of being completely out of place, I guess, and completely not aligned with what I was hearing. And back then I was really young. I started studying when I was 18, 19. And I didn't have, I guess, the confidence yet to be like, oh, maybe it doesn't make sense because it doesn't make sense. And I felt like I was just like not smart enough to understand how business works, let's say. But I pushed myself through the studies. So I did actually like a finance degree. And then afterwards, I did an internship in a fintech startup, which I have to say, super nice people. I really enjoyed working there and I learned a lot from them about like agile work and also strategic work. So I worked in fintech for a couple of years while I was studying. And then I was like, actually, something feels off, something feels not right. I want to move into the nonprofit field. And this is how I actually started studying European studies, because it was like in Germany. I don't know how it is in Scandinavia or in other countries, but I know like in Germany, it's like this, that when you study something in your bachelor's, you can't study something else in your master's. Like it has to be super connected to your bachelor's. So I had to do something business related or at least economics related. So the compromise was kind of like I found this master program which has economics in it, which was then my focus, but the rest was kind of interdisciplinary. So I could like get a foot in into a different field. So this is where the whole like interdisciplinary part like really started to like dawn on me, like, oh, this is actually what I want to do. And also while I was studying in the master's and working in the NGOs, I already had like this feeling of it's still extractive, like the way people work in NGOs and the way also in activism, it's still like the structures of it and the work that is done and how it's done. It's still really extractive, be it from the activists or the people who work in these organizations themselves or through the funding landscape, etc. So like there's so much systemic things going on. So this was like the first like kind of like realization also through looking at it from different perspectives and also then moving into social business and social impact startups and all this space, kind of understanding, okay, like every time I'm trying to move into a different direction, into different perspectives, something like I'm hitting a wall systemically. So like this was all like happening at the same time. And then actually I started the design thinking educational track at the D School in Potsdam. I did the 2 semesters, the advanced and the basic and the advanced track. And also like super random actually how I got into this, because it was more like I looked at people who I felt do cool things. Like I kind of looked through their CVs and it was like all of them have founded like really cool businesses or are doing really cool projects. And I'm really like interested in what they do and I really admire them. So like what do they have in common? And most of them kind of have studied this design thinking educational track. So this is how I got into the design part. So I studied design thinking for a year while I was doing my master's. And while I was doing my master's and doing the design thinking, I started to like really dig into the system stuff. So I wrote my master thesis on economic systems transformation and narratives around economic systems transformation. And this is how it basically at some point all came together. While this was happening, I founded my business and started working as a design thinking practitioner. And then at some point, the whole like strategic design field opened to me, because I understood, like, to me personally, it's like kind of the intersection between design thinking, systems thinking, and strategic foresight. So like the business aspect of my work came in, the systems thinking aspect of my interdisciplinary work came in, and the design thinking part also was already there because of the educational track. So this is kind of how everything came together for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Inspiring. I love how your track has been defined by what resonated with you, right? You had these like senses and vibrance. You could like feel what wasn't working and what was working. And then you patched it all together in the end somehow, right?
I've never thought about it this way, because it's actually like, yeah, it's actually true. Because I had this in a conversation the other day with a person when they were like, so what does the job market want me to do? And what, like, you know, and I'm just like constantly like, but what do you want to do? Like, what does feel right to you? And I do feel it was difficult for me to get out of this like narrative of like, what does my mom want me to do? You know, or like, how can I earn money and all this stuff? And it's so scary to shift it and be like, what feels true in my body, and how to know when to move on when it doesn't feel right. And how to also overcome the fear of like not knowing. And this is like, it became the whole like core and aspect of my work.
I think we easily doubt ourselves when something doesn't feel right, as you say. Then you just sit in a classroom studying economics or something and you're like, oh, I don't get this. Why? You know? But then you put it on yourself instead of actually looking at it and saying at some point, okay, maybe it's because something needs to be changed. Maybe it's because we have moved on from understanding it like this. It doesn't resonate with us anymore. So I think that's it's very, very inspiring that you actually took action and designed your path in sort of the limitations that you also had, as you say, in the educational system of not being able to completely pivot, right?
In many ways.
How has your business background then also informed how you work today as a strategic designer?
I mean, so what I think I always kind of try to bring into this activist and political work, and the way I work now, is trying to be able to speak both languages. Kind of, so like to me, like also I feel like while I was like, it's interesting because while I was studying and when I was really young, I think it was also a way to like, explain it to myself why I'm actually doing this, like to give myself like a good argument for like, okay, yeah, it makes sense you're studying business, but I was like, I want to understand the system. Like I want to understand how the system works. I want to understand how businesses work. I want to understand it to change it in the long run. I also understand like it's not my job to change it now. Like I understand that it's a collective effort and it's like a really systemic and structural effort. But I still think that the way I learned about it and the way how I work in the organizations I was part in, even though again, like nothing bad I can say about them, like about the people who work there, I do understand really well, and I have the confidence to say, I've been there, I've seen it, I know it's not working. So to me, it's kind of a different lens than the pure activist lens and the pure NGO lens, let's say. Be it just for the sake of like having this, like being able to say this, you know, like I've seen it, I've done it, I know it's not working. Not because I know more or because like I'm smarter than people who work in these activist fields. It's just because I really do know from my experience that, it's just super extractive in the way it's done. And we need to change it. So like, I think it's also when like you come from the perspective of the political activism or from NGOs, or also now what we see like in politics right now in the narrative, like we should run the state like a business. Being able to say like, well, it won't work because of these extractive mechanisms, right? So yeah, I think just being able to see this from both sides is super valuable. That being my point. I think I underestimate how valuable it is sometimes, because it's really subtle. That's why I kind of struggle a little bit to explain it as well. But it's really subtle, and I do understand the different perspectives. And in general, I think that's kind of what works.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense to, or at least for me to, before you go in and change something or propose to change a system that's already set in place, to actually first go in and see what is working and what is not working, right? It's kind of like having that extra lens of analyzing what we have in place. And there's usually also a or many reasons why we have the systems that we have today, although they might be faulty or they need to change, but there's some history behind it at least. Do you think that this is something very crucial for a strategic designer to have, to actually go in and look at the problem and be very critical in order to then propose a different route?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think in general, the systemic lens is super important, right? And it's also not always about like, breaking things and like discarding things and being like, we don't need this anymore. I think this is also something I had to learn, that there's immediately what I thought when you asked me, how does like your business entrepreneurial background inform your work? It's also like me thinking immediately, but there's also good things about it, right? So I get to use a specific strategic lens towards organizing or towards building an organization, which is maybe then missing in some other spaces, which I like then can contribute, right? Like this is something I can contribute. And at the same time, I do feel like, yes, this like critical lens of understanding what is there, what can be preserved, and what can be taken with us basically into a new paradigm, but what needs to be changed. And also then understanding that it's a really gentle and scary process as well, having this like sensitivity towards the process itself, but then the courage and the wisdom as well to some extent to name it and to be clear about it, and to not sugarcoat it basically, but then give like a good analysis of why, and it's connected to so many different layers.
Yeah.
You also mentioned that you worked at some NGOs also before. Mm-hmm. Could you mention the ones or some of the ones that you worked with, if you're comfortable with that?
Yeah, of course.
But maybe more importantly, like how different is it to work at an NGO compared to the fintech company that you worked with?
Yeah, so I've worked for SOS Humanity, which is a sea rescue organization in Germany that used to operate in a European network. I also worked for the UNESCO Commission. I worked for a couple of months, 7 months in Tbilisi in Georgia for the German Institute of Exchange, the DAAD. It's like an academic exchange program for students all over the world to go then to Germany and to do their research there, and which is part of the UNESCO Commission in the program that I participated in. And then I worked for some like mental health organizations as well but it's more like the social impact startup space, but it's kind of a charitable, it had a charitable status. And for the fintech, so what I see now from my work right now, because I'm working a lot with NGOs now as a strategic designer and a freelancer, I do see that like the whole funding system and the system around money is like completely different, of how it's obtained, of how it's managed, of how it's distributed within the organization. So this is very different because I see like a high dependency of nonprofit organizations to public, like at least in Germany, it's like this, a big dependency towards public funding. And I'm pretty sure in other countries it's the same. So you kind of like super dependent, you are super dependent to the political developments of your country and what the government is willing to fund and what it's not.
Okay.
So This is a big thing. Or you're relying on crowdfunding and you're relying on donations. And on the other side, you have the fintech companies that are really market oriented and growth focused. So you can see this in the culture, and you can see it how people work and how people deal in general with stability, security, money, work, etc. But like what is common, like as I said, like the extractive mechanisms of we all need to put in 50, 60 plus hours, and we need to work a lot because for one reason we need to make the company grow, and for the other reason we need to fulfill our purpose and whatever. But like the structure or the governance structure of the organization doesn't allow for purposeful work in general in both sides. So this is something they have in common from my perspective. So right now what I see is like NGOs trying to find new ways of generating more diversified cash flows. So basically not just being dependent on public funding, but understanding, again, what do we have in our resources and our networks already, what is already there that can be maybe a business model or something we can work, like try out things with, like, for example, like crowdfunding initiatives, but with like business models attached and like kind of diversified, like still public funding and philanthropy still is a very important part of the money that comes in. But like it becomes more and more like there's more and more awareness around being a bit more independent. But then again, the next question is, if we design a business model, how do we make it non-extractive, and how do we make it in a way that is not the same as a fast-growing fintech company, which then completely defeats the purpose of the organization. So like this is something that I'm seeing right now, which is super interesting. And this is where I'm like super curious to see, okay, what is actually a regenerative business model in a non-regenerative extractive system? and how can forming at least one with like kind of non-negotiables of what this business model should have, how can this help to maybe shape the system? And then I also have questions, is this even possible, right? Like, where are limitations? And they're obviously there. And is it even possible? But I think this is like a really interesting like thing that is happening in the NGO space, at least with the organizations that I work with, that people are just done with constantly being burned out and tired and running after money and seeing what happens like politically in Europe in general, but especially also in Germany. It's people are asking the question of like, am I going to be able to do this work? And people are being cut, organizations being completely cut from one day to the next. And so the topic of resilience emerges. And then the question is, what are business models that are resilient for purposeful, non-profit organizations? What are governance structures? And is it even possible in the system we are?
I just thought that before we continue, that could you just explain your definition of regenerative design, just so we have like a baseline to move forward with?
I mean, everything, as I said, that is non-extractive, that gives more than it takes. So regenerative to me means I give more than I take out, and it's kind of in reciprocity. So we've talked about it. I've been at a festival, like conference last week, which was called Future Days, and they spoke about symbiotic futures and about symbiosis and about like coming together. And I think, again, like I think regenerative design and the word regeneration is also I'm guilty of that, like used like in an inflationary way. And I do feel it's more about like showing and embodying and feeling, and rather than telling. And so this is also something that can be like a definition somehow, which is then again like described in words. But I do feel it's more about doing less than saying, and really being instead of trying to perform and present. This is to me also regenerative, when we get out of our heads and out of our just strategic mind and really sense into what it means to be in symbiosis, be together, be in connection, be with us, be present with the living world, and integrate this in the way we do things. So to me, it's really that. And then to me, again, like this, like even the word like regenerative business model kind of seems wrong. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, how do we integrate this way of thinking right now with what we have, right? Like we have to work with what we have, which also doesn't only mean financial and monetary resources, but also the resources and capacities we hold right now as humans in the stage of life we're in. And be gentle with this. And then at the same time, just living in this ambiguity of the world around us, and holding this tension between not yet and like this is not something that would work right now. And this is like a constant struggle I have. Yeah. So like, to give you a definition, I guess like this is like basically it. Like you can't really define it. It's something you live in. This is something you embody. And it's something that is constantly clashing with our reality around us, because I think everything around us is everything but regenerative. And then we find like small spaces and communities and practices and ways of being where we can sense it for a moment and then it's gone. And I think the goal is to cultivate it more and more.
That is super interesting, because I was thinking, where does the regenerative business model, if we call it that, where does it start? Does it start within the people in the organization? Now we look at it from an organizational perspective. Does it start with the regenerative leadership? Does it start with an organizational structure or governance, that structure that changes? Or like, where do you see it starting?
I think there's like not one point of starting. I think that like everything that is connected to change and transformation is happening on multiple levels at the same time. And I do feel that oftentimes also, honestly, I'm also sometimes wondering, like, is it even possible to like transform a corporate of like multiple thousands of people? Like, I'm wondering, like, is it even something that is really possible? Because we also have like this Dumblins number, right? Of like 120 to 150 people can only like know each other and really know each other and really connect to each other and really work together. So I'm wondering, like, is it even possible to have like large communities like this, large societies like this? Is it even a community anymore when people don't really know and connect to each other? Same for corporates, right? So I'm wondering really like where, and like then every time I'm coming back to this thought of like it actually starts with the people not in the organization, but like just people as humans, like within them. This realization of, not this, whatever it is. And I think for every person, it's really different. Like we had a workshop the other day where I kind of posed this question for people to reflect on: what was your moment when you understood like actually not this. And it's like super different, like from the way we're socialized, from the way we grow up, from the way we like, I don't know, like get into the work that we do. It's like super different, like the way we experience this not yet moment. And I think this is like actually where it actually starts, like on multiple levels. And then how it like takes on and how it like continues, I think is super, super different. And there it's like for everybody to decide, what do I experiment with? What do I try out? What questions do I ask? How do I connect with others to understand? And then again, like thinking about more than human, like how do I then try to like relate to the living world, to the nature? How do I reconnect with it? And what is my process with that? So it's kind of, I think it's kind of this process, but everything happens at the same time. But I think the starting point is this not yet moment.
Are there then some tools or ways for an organization to go about it to sort of enhance the realization of that you need a different mindset or a different way of living in the world, so that the organization can take some of their employees out into nature, as you say, or incorporate this more than human perspective into their daily life somehow, so they do foster this transition? Is there a way to do that? And is that also how you work with organizations, and how do you do it?
Yeah, the question is like, what would be the motivation of the organization to do so?
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, I don't see, like, the thing is like, if the organization, like we talk about the organization as if it's like a human, you know, like a human with the mind and the idea of like, you know, but it's actually not like this, I think. Like, it's more like the people inside shape it, right? So it is happening from within, but then again, it's super, super difficult. It's like, yeah, what I see, it's just happening from within, like the people again, like it's not yet moment. And then the people, it's like shape it, because the organization, if it's embedded in the current system, doesn't want this, because it's about making money, it's about growing, and it's about like feeding current paradigms. Like, it's not really something that is intrinsically wanted. It's something that needs to be like contributed through the people within the organization. And it's like not an easy process at all, because it's also like doubting, unlearning. It's super painful, like the unlearning process within organizations, even if people really like want it and really feel like not yet, and let's reconnect and let's go to nature, and then doing it and feeling super disconnected and feeling like, what am I doing here? Like, it doesn't make any sense, because like everything around me doesn't like really like hold this for me. And then going through this crisis of like, oh my God, it doesn't make any sense. And then not having like, this was what happened for me actually, like maybe for other people in like organizations, it's maybe easier. But I was really alone in this process of not yet. Like, I was like, oh my God, this is so fucked up. I was writing my thesis and I was alone in my room, and I was really, really miserable. I had a really, really big mental health crisis. And I had no one around me who could be like, this is normal. This is what happens when you realize the system's not working. And this is what helps you to, like, if you're asking for tools and whatever, right? Like, it's just being together with people who get it. And I wasn't together with people who get it. I was really alone in this. This changed now, luckily. And I know a lot of people who are going through this and who went through this. But yeah, just like the Joanna Macy is one of like the people I follow a lot, who wrote a book on active hope, and like her work is amazing. She's already in her 90s, and she's been working in this field since the 70s in systems change. And she coined this term, also like said at least, what did she say? The lonely witness. Like the lonely witness of feeling completely alone and disconnected from your friends and from your coworkers. And this is something that happens, I think, when you have this not yet moment.
Yeah.
And if you're together with people, it can be easier.
Yeah, definitely.
How did you then get in contact with people who are also in the same field? Was it just through, I don't know, like finding people online, or did you start to go to different events? And can you maybe explain a little bit about that process?
Yeah, I started writing about it a lot. So like what happened then, like in the beginning, like in the first years, I said like 2 years ago, when I wrote this thesis, I had this like moment when I handed it in, when I finished, I wrote this kind of like a little bit of a summary of why the economic system needs a transformation. Just put in like different insights from my thesis. And I was scared and nervous before posting it. Like, I do recall this moment where I was like, what if I'm wrong? What is like completely radical? And like, oh my God, like really, I had to go through a really like long process of being like, is it actually okay to say this? Which is like insane to me now in retrospect, but I'm like, it wasn't something that I saw a lot of people like posting, but now it's like more prominent. And then I posted it, and it got like on LinkedIn, and it got like multiple thousands impressions, like insane. And I gained like 300 followers over a couple of hours.
Yeah.
Was the response positive in general?
Yeah.
Or was there a lot of resilience?
No, a lot. Like, yeah, I think also LinkedIn is a bubble, like in many ways. Like, you don't get content, you don't like see content that is not meant for you, I guess. But mostly yes. And then like just some people being like, oh, we shouldn't like being like overly academic about, which is true. Like, I can't publish my academic paper on like, or like parts of it. And then like, okay, there's like other issues, and also especially like for working class, it's not accessible. And I was like, okay, give me a break. I'm just starting the process. But yeah, like other than that, it was overly positive. And yes, and I felt like, okay, I hit a nerve here, and it's something that people want to see more of. So this was a big moment for me to get in touch with people and to become more confident about it. And then this was the point where I started to write about the process itself. So like this inner, like, I don't know, I don't even remember like everything that I wrote and what I published and what I posted, but it was like just in moments where I felt like, okay, that's an interesting insight. Or this is something that like kind of like clicks, you know, like in this whole like process of unlearning and understanding and reshaping and reframing. I would just publish it, and a lot of people would resonate with it and message me. And then it was like a really organic process. Also, like specifically in Berlin, I talked about it the other day. I felt like I haven't had a community of people in Berlin, even though I'm from there and I grew up there. And I do feel like a lot of like friend groups like either fell apart or I wasn't a part of them anymore because things changed and I kind of, I don't know, developed in a different direction. And now I feel like since last year, especially like with women, like I have like such a strong community of women who do a similar work in many different ways, like people who do somatic therapy, people who do business, people who do breath work, people who do film and art and whatever, like so many different perspectives and so many different policy, so many different disciplines, journalism, sorry, so many different disciplines. But like coming, like having kind of the same like energy, like not even like saying, this is my purpose and it's the same as yours, but like they kind of bring the same energy to the table. And yeah, I'm gonna get emotional. I feel like so honored, and also like with women like who are older than me, and I feel like so connected to them. And I do feel like really there's a community building up through this work and through the process that it takes to do this work. And it's I'm super grateful for that. And it was a super organic process just through sharing and through being open and through also admitting that we don't have a clue what's going on. Yeah. And we're so scared, but we're also more alive than ever in many aspects when we get together and when we get to do this work and when we get to do workshops with the baby, and then the baby's like being passed on while facilitating, and you know, and it's just like everything has space and everything is there, and people cry in check-ins and it's fine, and people hold each other when like something goes wrong in like facilitation or in like spaces where people are not ready to confront it, or we like learning so much constantly, and we're just friends, and we're like and through the internet, through LinkedIn, it's so funny. Like it's people just like message you and like, hey, is it okay if I send you a voice note? And we exchange with voice notes how it's going, because I feel really connected. And it's, I don't know, it gives me like, I know it's like a weird word, but it does give me hope, and it does give me strength. Honestly, it gives me strength and energy to move on and keep doing this work.
I mean, of course, it sounds extremely empowering. And I think we have sort of experienced something similar, but not in the degree that you have. But when we did the strategic design master program, because that was more likely actually just like a hub for people who were like-minded, right? Who'd experienced the same resistance towards something existing, something that they were, you know, as architects or designers in the field, experiencing there's something wrong here. Then they went to Copenhagen to study strategic design. And then we all sort of gathered together with different backgrounds and within different disciplines and sort of developed our own language for that. And I think you also have Alex, like a really big gift in being able to communicate what a lot of us feel. And I think through your LinkedIn, which is also where we stumble upon you, you know, you really create a space for these thoughts and these like changes. And I think that's just really beautiful and really like acknowledgeable, and really we're really grateful for you doing that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But I mean, that was just like us sitting here and complimenting each other. But like, I'm wondering, but you really do like a great work in communicating exactly these thoughts from a lot of people and experiences. How did you get the courage to just start on your own and found Realutopia after your studies and career?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, honestly, I felt like an alien that doesn't fit anywhere. So that's the simple answer.
Gonna make my own.
It was, this meme which said like job market is so bad, I started following my dreams.
Yeah.
This sums it up.
Yeah.
I felt inherently unemployable.
Yeah.
Inherently unemployable and felt like, and also like, even like, I have to say again, like I have not a bad word to say about the people I worked with and for the organizations I worked for. And the last organization I worked for as an employee was a sustainability consultancy, and I worked like also like people who originated from the D school. So it was like kind of this D school kind of little group. And yeah, so much space for like exchange and internal processes and needs and team dynamics and whatever. Everything was like kind of there. And I still felt like I need my freedom. I need my independence, like at least in the way, like I need collaboration. I need connection. Yes. But I do need, like, if I decide today, oh, this is something I want to look into, or this is something I want to apply for, or this is something I want to try out, or let's just do a workshop on this or whatever. And it's not something you can't do when you're employed, but it did feel like a specific restriction towards my time and towards what I can imagine and what I can do. And this was actually the driver of like, also like just simple things. Like I want to like see how my energy levels are on a Tuesday, I just want to see like, if I wake up, like, do I feel like working, or do I feel like, oh, now the sun comes out? Actually, like it was raining for 5 days. I want to go outside and I want to enjoy the sun and I want to, recharge, and also like cyclical work and all of this stuff. So I was like, okay, I really want to
explore,
be my own boss and explore. And it was, I was doubting it at times. So I was like, what have I done? But I haven't looked back ever since.
Right.
And then you started the business. How did you actually get in contact with your first, I guess, clients, you could say? Or like, how did you actually go out to the world and then start helping people and facilitate different workshops and so on? Like, what happened in those maybe first months to a year? And was it very difficult to also get started? Or was there already, I assume that you do a lot of your work also locally in Germany, but do you also do like online? Can you maybe explain a little bit also like the setup behind it?
Yeah, like, okay, I'm going to give you the answer I think everybody should always give you. And like, mostly they do, but like nobody does it on their own. And it's always about connections and contacts. It's plain and simple like this.
Yes.
It's always like who you know, who you talk to, who you get along with, and it's plain and simple. This is how I got started, basically. But also it's about, I guess, trying things out and putting yourself out there. And my first client. So what I've done is like, I got into my work through design thinking, honestly. I think it was easier back in the day, what I heard from colleagues, at least, that there was like a big design boom and everybody was about design and design thinking. So it was like for people really easy to get into the field of design research, facilitation, sprints, and all of these things, because there was a big demand for it. But yeah, like when I like finished my basic track, I kind of like, while I was still like part-time employed for this consultancy, where I was already also like learning a bit about this as well. I was working in communications for them, but like still I was like already like doing facilitation here and there and like seeing their processes. I think I posted on LinkedIn again, like one of the first posts I've done, like, hey, I'm facilitating workshops on design thinking now, doing trainings, etc. And then I applied for this, like the Z2X, it's called. It's like a festival for young people organized by the Zeit, which is a big newspaper in Germany. So they do the Zeit Online, actually, just a sub magazine, I think. And they organized like this festival, and it's like actually like a really cool, like there's a lot of people that do really amazing work in different fields, but also in journalism, etc. And you can offer workshops and sessions. And I applied to do a session on design thinking. And this was my first workshop. This was my first workshop, and I slept like 1 hour or 2 hours the night before because I was so nervous.
Whoa.
And then it was also 50 people.
Oh my God.
Whoa.
Apparently I like to do things in the extreme way, but like, this was my first workshop, and my first client was in this workshop, basically.
Oh, fantastic.
Oh, that's amazing.
They approached me afterwards and they're like, hey, can you do training for us? And afterwards I did. It was like the first one that I did, and it was outside of Berlin. It was close to Munich. I went to there, and it was like, from there on, it just kind of went on like this. And you mentioned also in the beginning, Invisible. Like Invisible is an organization for diversity, equity, inclusion in organizations. And they also asked me to facilitate a sprint on accessible mobility in general. I think mobility from like the perspective of, people who are not normative, like not considered as like the norm, let's say, right? So yeah, from there on, it kind of like went on like this. And last year specifically, like last year, I had not much work. Honestly, it was really tough. Like this year is different, but last year was really, really difficult. And this was the time when I was really, okay, now it's time to dig into the uncomfortable stuff and sitting with it. So, and I was experimenting a lot last year and was writing more last year because I had the time and kind of like headspace. But I had the time for it. And this is also where this like strategic design aspect, I understood like, oh wow, like for me, it's like actually like what I mentioned in the beginning of the intersection of these different parts of my work. Cause I was like searching for a label, searching for something that would explain what I do. And strategic design was just like the closest that came to what I like, how I would define it. And from there, like, I don't know, like I just like messaged people where I felt like, oh, it's interesting what they do. Or then friends of friends recommended me. Like, honestly, it was like this weird flow of things, which was also stagnating. And then I was like confronted to like sit and be like, okay, let's look at the other parts. But other than that, I don't like, I feel like there was some strategy behind it, but at the same time, like this is what I'm also working on right now. Like, can I be more strategic in my own work?
Yeah.
Because it was just like, oh, like just like many things coming together. And of course, like there's things I would have done differently, but I'm actually like super happy for the way it like shaped and went and for the difficulties and the challenges that came on this path. And yeah,
from our experience, you need to hire an external strategic designer if you want anyone to analyze your own work. It's difficult to do from within. Alex, are there any projects that you have done at Realutopia that stands out or that you would like to sort of highlight as something that really inspired you or that you loved working with?
A couple. Yeah, a couple. Like one I really want to highlight is the Democracy Playbook by Unbiased the News. And Unbiased the News is an intersectional feminist newsroom in Berlin, which I don't think hired any Germans. It's like a super international organization. And I think they only consist of women, actually, yes. They have done this project, which is called the Democracy Playbook, where they collect stories from social movements from the global south that have overturned authoritarian regimes.
Okay.
And I did a strategy process for them for the dissemination of the book. And it was a really inspiring process because we also like looked at the whole like impact behind it and then understanding what it is actually all about. And one point that we came up with was that it is like inherently it is about also shaping the role of journalists in the field. So like completely, like for example, they don't believe in neutrality in journalism. They don't believe in parachute journalism, etc. They work in a solutions-oriented way. So like in a solutions journalism-oriented way. And yeah, it is really about showing the possibilities of what movements can do. And it's about like shaping the role of the journalist as not being outside of the movement, but within of the movement with a specific role. So it's not about like reporting about an issue or about something, but actually being within the cause and, being in co-creation and in movement together with the movement itself. So this is something that I want to highlight because it was a really cool project and I love working with them. And the editor-in-chief is also a friend of mine. That's what I mentioned before, right? Just people like becoming friends, and it's just you meet again and you talk about things and you go through struggles together. This is one project. The second project is the Transformation Lab, which is a concept for a bottom-up policy lab in historical abandoned places, which it's a concept that we built in the D-School in the advanced track, where it's about taking a place and taking also the history and the energy of a space, which is about like becoming and about transformation and co-designing and co-creating the space itself, but also the process together with the public, with activists, with scientists, with policymakers, and to create, like, use these spaces to this third spaces essentially, or this like in between spaces to bring people together that usually don't meet and don't get to talk about issues. And it's also not a think tank or a lab where we say, this is the topic, this is what's relevant right now, but we get people together to talk about what is relevant to them, what is pressing to them, and like work more with emergence. So long story short, that's a concept that we built. We handed it into the New European Bauhaus Prize. Now a year ago, we got awarded with one of the prizes. And since then, we like try to roll it out more and more and just see how it fits. But this is something that also takes a big part in my work, that I want to focus more on the design, co-design part of it, right? And like using space as a catalyzer for it as well. So this is the second one. And The third one is the institute that I'm also working with now for longer term, the Zoe Institute for Future Fit Economies. They have a bigger project which is called MAPS. It's on modeling, assessments, and policies for post-growth. And they are at the intersection of research and policy. So basically, this was to me mind-blowing after I wrote my thesis, actually, that projects like this exist and that they are funded by the European Commission. It's the Horizon Europe funded project.
Yeah.
It was not not a lot of money, but also not little money. And it's like a consortium of 9 institutes who are all researching independently from different perspectives on potential post-growth policies and modeling. And our job basically at Zoe is to like take these insights and try to get them into the policy cycles, into the field, to the public, making it digestible, making it understandable, making it clear. So this is something I'm super passionate about and super, honored to be part of as well, because it's like for the first time where I see, okay, this is like interdisciplinary work where people really try to get all these. It's like there's so much knowledge. There's so much knowledge on post-growth and potentials and models and whatever. And I don't see it really like getting into the right spaces for different reasons, and just like trying it out to like what does it take to bring this knowledge to the people who need it from different angles. So this is something I'm super interested in, and this is what we did with the project. So those are 3 projects that are specifically highlightable.
Yeah, definitely. Fantastic. And then you also do the documentaries and films with your partner?
Yes, we just started.
You just started, okay, because I'm curious about that, actually, where they published and stuff. But do you have anyone like that has been published?
Yeah, we made one.
Okay.
We made one film, and this is how it all started. This is why we're like, oh, this like it's so much fun and it works so well. And I was like, from the perspective of my own field, which he knows through me, but he's not like in the, you would say, industry, right? Like not in these spaces as much. And I'm like, this is what these spaces need. Oh my God, like this is exactly what we need. And this is how it kind of like, I was like, we need to do this. We need to like do more of it, and we need to like build it out. So we just like started building it up, but we already done a film, which was the start, which is interesting because I never had a moment where I've done something and I'm like, we need to do more of this. I was like, well, like I have an idea. Let's try to do it, you know? It was kind of a nice experience.
But also such a creative space for you to operate in, right? Where you say, as you say, like you have an idea and then you just go with it.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be strategic or anything. It has to have a purpose, of course, and a message, but yeah.
Can I tell the story quickly of how it like actually happened?
I'd love to.
Because I think it's important to explain the process behind it, and like to like then explain what is actually done or what we do. And so the process was that we went to a retreat by a community which originated from the ETH Zurich in September. It was on the topic of becoming peace, becoming liberation. So it was essentially like a super like important, like a zeitgeist topic of how do we bring people together come really from different perspectives and hold different truths? And how do we hold a space for people who like for friction, for conflict, and for like, you know, all of this stuff. So, like I brought my partner with me, who was a filmmaker, and he basically filmed like 4 days of everything. And it was very different from what I've noticed before, because he, again, same with the journalists. He was kind of part, even though he wasn't like all the time participating, because he had a different role, but he was part of the retreat. He wasn't like running around like pointing the camera at people's faces. He was like really participating, right? Making himself vulnerable as well and all this stuff. So then he was editing it at some point, and I think he didn't do any interviews, which was interesting. He had this idea of like, I'm not going to do interviews. I'm just going to take all the audio recordings from all the talks and from the discussions and everything that was done. And it was like 12 hours of audio material.
Wow.
And I think he got it down to 11 minutes.
Wow.
But he went through all of it, and it was like so much visual material as well as so much stuff that he recorded. And he recorded on analog film, Super 8, and also on digital. So both. And then so much work. But then he like went through like all the stuff, and that at some point like he hit like a wall. He's like, I can't, like I don't know how to like build a narrative around it. And then I sat down and like I built the narrative with what he like already cut down, and then he edited alongside the narrative. And the narrative is basically nothing that was fabricated or scripted beforehand. It was just what emerged from the talks. And the talks were not like, they didn't like talk to each other about like, what are we going to say? What are we going to do? It was literally just what happened in the moment. And then there was also discussions, like panel discussions where people just talk to each other like we do now. And then basically it like forms actually like, in my perspective now, like a perfect flow of a narrative. And then like 2 people from the community made music. They recorded the music together, and then we put the music underneath the words, and then it like fit perfectly with the images. And yeah, it was like also a process of like going through of like, okay, we're not going to do it the way that we always see it, like in like social media formats or like short clips. We're going to do something completely different and see how it works. And I do feel like the film holds the 6 minutes, like you can hold the attention because of like, you can feel how it flows together because of the process of how it was done. And then I'm like, okay, we need to do this more. Like we need to do like unscripted. Like, of course, it's more work. Now my next question is who's going to pay for it? But like, of course, it's more work.
Yeah.
But I think it's so worth it because like you don't like say this is like we're a community of this many people, we focus on this target group, we do these and this and these things, once a year we meet and blah blah blah. But it's like you don't have to explain it, you just see it. And we need to do more of this, I feel, because we then send it to participants and because like we wanted to get the consent to publish it. And then everybody was like, oh my god, it's exactly how it was being there. Like I feel like I'm back there.
Wow.
And this is exactly what I want to see more of in our spaces, where it's not about like pointing a camera at somebody and be like, okay, tell me about your work. But, you know, to like cultivate this relationship also while making it, while making the film, while producing something and really going to this flow together. And then also in the post-production, trusting the process in that sense to be like, I'm going to work with what is there. It's not staged. It's not scripted. And I'm going to take what's there. And of course, it's risky, but I feel like this is what we need more of.
Definitely.
And this is how we will work. So yeah. Just to give you a background.
Looking forward to see it.
I'm just super curious to also hear that work together with the filmmaker who I would guess also see that whole process or event in a very different way. I mean, filmmakers looks at things very differently compared to other people with different expertises. What was his first, let's say, way of seeing it very different from what you would have imagined from the beginning before you then sat down together to look at the narrative? Was it very different or was it already what you could have imagined?
So like it's a couple of things. So like first of all, it was like his idea to do this unscripted way, kind of. Like I think he just wanted, like full disclosure, it wasn't like a paid project, right? Like it was something we did to also participate. And then I think he used it for himself, like as a creative kind of outlet of like trying things out. So it was his idea and he also said like, yeah, it was risky not to do interviews. And he thought about like having backups, but he was already in this mindset that I would be in to some extent, right? To be like, let's just film and see what happens. And like, it's not a transactional relationship between a client and you. So not saying that it can't happen in this way as well in a client service provider relationship kind of, but it was like a different quality of relationship, I guess, which allowed for him to like do a different kind of work. So that's the first part. But then in the narrative part of course, like we also like, we struggled a lot to like find common ground because he was like still in this like mindset of like, okay, there's a client and they want something specific out of it. And what they want is basically what they see on social media or what they see out there. And they have a certain expectation, even though there was like, there's no expectations, do whatever you want. There's still an expectation. So that's the next thing I'm wondering for future projects, how we handle this. But there's an expectation. And I was like, no, like we have to do it like this, you know, we have to just like go with the flow. We have to like take the narrative as it flows. We have to like, you know, it was like for me, like from my perspective of my work and also like not being close to not being in contact with the people who have the expectations, let's say, in the process, I was like, okay, let's do it differently. Let's try something out. And there was a tension there because of course, like there's also, okay, I've edited this way and I've looked at it this way and I want to do it this way for sure. And there was a bit of tension of like, but let's try something else and let's go from a different angle. And then it was like a push and pull kind of mechanism where I had to like, you know, take a step back, he had to take a step back. Then we had to look at it together again, you know, and then like the whole process itself of like just describing it in this way, because like also the tension and this like moving beyond this tension was also part of the process. And it was also a part of our own unlearning in my perspective as well, from his perspective as well, of our own conditioning of how is like client work delivered or how is, you know, like the whole thing around it. It was just a complete yeah, it was such a big learning and so interesting to just see the process. And also then be like, oh, that's actually how I want to work. Also for him, right? To be like somebody who, yeah, like does a lot of like commercial projects, which is fine. Like, you know, it works and it's fine. But like there's a different quality to this kind of work. And also how to really bring this into a client relationship then, right? Because there was always going to be expectations. But this is a way of like working, I think he kind of learned in film school as well, or how films are done, how documentaries are done out of interest, out of curiosity, out of creativity, out of drive. And then again, how to bring this into these spaces and make people understand that the quality and the results, even though the process is like way more difficult and complicated and complex, it's worth it because it's real, it's authentic. It's something that is really there. And it's something that can't be scripted and staged. And if you give it trust, then yeah. But yeah, I hope I answered your question. But this is, there was a tension for sure. But like,
I think you did. Yeah, to me, it also makes sense to do it with that very like unscripted format, because the second you start doing like high production lights and, pointing a camera in someone's face, you also remove from that, first experience that they're there to experience, right?
Yeah.
So like I'm super curious to actually see the film, because now I'm also like I'm painting like different pictures in my head at the moment. So I'm really I'm curious just to see how it actually looks. But are you planning to do more of these now in the future as well? Have you kind of found your little niche, you could say?
Yeah, like we try. Like, I mean, I pitched it to some people like at this conference I was at the Future Days conference. And there was like talks about this, like not specifically about this, but there's a lot of like in the futures and systems thinking space, there's a lot of like conversations around, first of all, storytelling. I mean, you've noticed that probably that storytelling is everywhere, but also like specifically this, how do we find a new language for what we want to say? And like this feeling of like words are so limited in the ways, like even writing to some extent, just like really like, literal writing of like explaining is so limited. And then it's not just film, but like poetry, expression, physical expression, like all these other different forms of like finding ways to transmit these complex processes that go on inside of us, but also in our society and everything. So yeah, that are deeply relational and deeply human. So yeah, I was pitching it to a lot of people and everybody was like resonating because it was like a topic as well in the talks and in general. And I was like, this is what we're trying to do. We want to do more of this with film. Like we want to try film as a format or as a new language, let's say, and with a specific process in mind. And yeah, the same questions arose then, like how is this work consensual? How do you like co-create together with the people who you are filming? And like, yeah, again, camera is a really like delicate topic as well for many reasons, right? Just like pointing camera is like, yeah, you have to have a certain sensitivity and relationship and trust with people. So there's so much work that goes into that. But yeah, really, really would be curious if there's people out there who would give it a shot. And there's one project my partner's working now with, who's also a friend of mine actually. And they said from that, like without us like pointing towards this or having this idea, was their idea kind of like we want to have a documentary over a year and not just social media videos. We want to have an artifact of our work. And this is like the first person that I've talked to that actually like took money in her hand and was like, we want to pay for this specifically and want to do this. So I'm really curious to see if there's more people who are going to shift more towards that.
Yeah, not to get too much into it, but we did something similar in school. And to me, I mean, it's a very interesting format because it's so, honest in a sense. What is even more interesting to me is also the editing process, because instead of just creating something to tell the narrative, you're actually doing it the opposite, where you remove stuff. So you have to be very selective also with what you're keeping. What you also, Alex, said that you had hours of material, but in the end, you only had 11 minutes that you show out. I mean, that's also the most important things of the storyline of the narrative, right? That you're choosing to showcase to everyone else. Anyways, I just thought that's also an interesting part, because you're just not generating anymore in the same sense. You're just removing stuff from what you're showing.
Yeah. And I think it's also, again, a really biased process. And there's so many ways it can turn out, I guess. And it's just like, also like then from my perspective of how I see the narrative, I guess. And like people have just to trust me on this. But I feel it's like life, like you can make so many different decisions every day, but you choose specific decisions for yourself and for the people around you. And it's just the narrative of your life that's unfolding. And then there's like so many different parallel universe in which like your life like unfolded completely differently. So I like tend to see it in this way. But I think like the most important part for me about this type of work is that I do see that organizations are trying to do different, like they try to work differently, right? They try to be, as we said in the beginning, like this is the full circle, trying to be less extractive, trying to be less linear in their thinking, trying to be more relational, work more in ecosystems instead of like competing, all of this stuff. But then in their like marketing and communications, it's like, let's feed the algorithm. Let's like push it,
Yeah.
And then like the poor people in communications are all burned out and nobody knows what they actually talk about anymore because like everything is set, but the algorithm is still continuing to like push them out. And then I'm like, what if we just like did things differently? Like what if in this field as well of communications, marketing, etc., for the specific organizations, we would just focus on longer form, I don't know, like text, but also like film specifically, because like, okay, we understand that people can't hold their attention for as much longer anymore, but how do you create formats that are actually like, have the quality of a film that transmit what needs to be transmitted and not in literal words only, but like in actual images and audiovisual content in different ways, or like not even just film, like as I said, like a new language for all of it all together, overcoming this like, okay, we need to feed the algorithm because everybody else does, but actually like it's so misaligned. I feel like it's even worse for these people because it's so misaligned with what they do, because the linear growth paradigm is then still present in their communications. And I'm like,
exactly,
we need to do things differently.
And that maybe also just really captures the essence of strategic design, right? That you need to come with a contribution that is visionary, that is different, that is sort of challenging the existing algorithms or frameworks or ideas or client briefs. And in this space, you've actually been able to sort of enter the art space. That's very different than if you just delivered some sort of film to a client that has a specific brief of what you need to achieve.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting. And I want to ask you a more future-led question. Where do you see, or what role do you see strategic design playing in the future, sort of bridging the current industries with future needs and scenarios?
So I do think so. Like one framework I do like to work with is the 3 Horizons framework. And to me, the strategic design part of like working with this framework is then really to look into the current paradigm through a specific lens. Like, for example, one time we did this with the lens of business and from different industries. But then another time we did it through the lens of narratives around money, wealth, and the good life. So like you look at from different lenses, you look at the current paradigm, you understand historically where it's coming from, and this can apply to societies, but it can apply historically to an individual. So like how was I like how did I grow up? What were the narratives around me that my parents like talked about all the time? Like something that I was like connected to in my childhood through school, through the educational system, through my work, etc. So historically, how did I get here as a person, but then also as a society, how did we get here? So this is one lens, and then sensing into what else? So what can be different? And I think like I have it in discussions so often that people say like, okay, but we had communism, we had socialism, nothing worked. Like we have to stick with capitalism. I'm like, what if we imagine something completely different? And people don't even get to this point of being like, okay, there's only like 2 different options. Like we live in this binaries, and if it's not this, it has to be that. And I'm just like, okay, like really sensing into this future space that is unthinkable. This was a topic at the Future Days talk as well, one of the talks by somebody from the Dark Matters Lab, Simon. And he talked about what if the futures that we really need right now are truly unthinkable. So to me, yeah, it's about like sensing into it, but I think we can't completely define it. And the strategic design part, to get to my point, the strategic design part is kind of to what you said, like to bridge the understanding and the analysis and the grief, I guess, as well around this is not working anymore, and to bridge it towards something that is unthinkable. And the strategic design part then is like, yes, strategy is important, but then I'm also wondering, like, will it be ever enough? Because the certainty, like strategy is like to me connected a lot to certainty and to determination and to kind of, I know where I'm going and I have a kind of, like I have a focus in the end of the horizon and I know that this is important, which I think is important just to like give yourself like a bit stability. But at the same time, I'm wondering, will it get us there 100%? I think it's a good starting point. Like mostly I think it's like leaning into the unknown, leaning into the uncertainty and working with what is there. And it's like kind of also a dance, towards this unthinkable future and cultivating the qualities and the relationships that are needed for this process. And I think strategic design can help, but it's also to some extent very limited. This is something I had to learn, I guess, in the last couple of days, weeks, also at this conference through my own experiences. And I had like the reminder again, like, yeah, some things you can't think into existence and some things you can't plan and strategize into existence. And sometimes it's also limiting us to some extent. So yeah, I don't know, maybe it's not a perfect answer, but it's like kind of also like a question or like a provocation I want to like pose here, like, what are the limits of it as well, I guess, and how can it help us? So I think the awareness and the sense for it is super important. know the limitations, but also know the good parts about it.
How do you then work towards something that is unthinkable and undefined? Or is that the whole point, that you don't actually know what you're working towards?
I do feel it's kind of the whole point.
Yeah.
It's the test that I think many of us are often failing to be like, okay, what is the outcome, like what is like the ROI, of like me doing this, and it's more about like, how does it actually feel to be in the moment and do it, how, like, this is like the actual, like, how do we like measure things in all together, how do we understand if something feels right or is moving in the right, let's put it in quotes, like in the right directions, as we said, like, how do I know that this narrative that I picked is the right one for this film, right? I don't know, like, and I will probably never know. But for the moment, like, it felt connected, aligned, and right. So, and it can change in the future. And I think, like, I don't have a perfect answer for this unthinkable part, because I have to think about it as well for myself a bit longer, because it was just really fresh. But I was really inspired, and I was like, oh, actually, yeah. Because he gave some examples, like historically as well, like some things happened and nobody saw it coming, and there's like glitches in our realities where like, oh my God, like what's going on? Like this, like power outage the other week. I was in Portugal, and like all of a sudden it's like a glitch in the system. Like there's no power, and like all of a sudden people come together in completely different ways. So yeah, I do think it's more and more about like cultivating this. We don't know the outcome, but we know what we need kind of from ourselves and each other to feel grounded and to feel connected. I think this is more what it is really truly about. And there's so many different ways of doing, like connecting to each other, connecting to oneself, and it's super individual. But I think this is super important to know also, like within your body, and like the body tells you if something feels off. And I know we all have had this experience, and coming again back to the experience of my studies, when I felt like sitting in the classroom and I felt in my body like my brain is not even absorbing the information because it doesn't, like, I can't connect to it. Like I can't connect to it at all. And I think this is like when now in my work where I feel like I'm connecting to things I'm doing, like I'm understanding them beyond a cognitive level, I do feel like I'm moving in the right direction, again, quotations, and I have no clue where I'm going. And I kind of feel like it's time to embrace it as well as a society, to like think less about like where are we going, what's the outcome, and more like how do we feel doing it, and how do we relate to each other.
So Alex, what are your expectations for the coming years and the future ahead?
Oh my God, I have no clue. I have no clue where I'm going. No, but like I think my intention is to unlearn more, to be more present in what I do, and again, like move away from this, like the outside world wants this from me, or I think the market wants this from me, to even more towards like what feels right, what feels good, what feels regenerative. So what doesn't like drain me completely out of energy, but gives me actually energy back, and where do you actually see some sort of like impact, I guess. I think like in our types of work, it's like the feedback loops are so long, like until you see actually that something is happening is so long. I think I want to cultivate more of like parts of the work, which I think with the film is like super, like to me super inspiring to have this like creative, like even more creative aspect in my work, to like see something unfolding and see something being created, and then being able to show people like what has been done. So I think I want to get more into this like shorter feedback loops kind of work, but also then hold the capacity for longer feedback loops.
Yeah.
And I just like to continue this work in the narrative space, and continue being interdisciplinary and I guess undefinable and unlabelable. And see how it goes. And I'm gonna work more one-on-one with people. I'm gonna do I'm starting a certificate for systemic coaching as well, to have more tools for this. And decided this a couple of weeks ago actually. So this is also something I'm gonna dive more into, because this is also like deeply relational work where I do feel it has an impact, like for people it's super valuable.
Yeah. Exciting. Do you have any book recommendations or podcast recommendations that you would like to share with our listeners?
The first one is that I already mentioned, The Act of Hope.
Yeah.
How to Face the Mess We're In Without Going Crazy. It's actually a book title by Joanna Macy and Chris Johnstone. It's a book that changed completely my perspective on my work and is super, 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 super full of incredible value and stories. And I would always recommend. And the podcast connected to that, which is also new, is We Are the Great Turning with Joanna Macy and Jess Sarante. Mm-hmm. And it's an interview between a kind of mentee of Joanna and her. And they have also exercises. I just listened to it. That's really, really good. If you do any types of systems work, regeneration is a topic in your work, and you're asking the questions that we've been talking about today, I think this is a good place to start. Another one is Off the Grid, How to Leave Social Media Without Losing All Your Clients. It's a podcast by Softer Sound Studio with Emilia Ruby. Basically, like it's about like leaving social media, but it's about so much more. It's actually about anti-capitalist business and if it's even possible in so many different perspectives. So if you're interested in that, super cool. And of course, On Being by Krista Tippett, super, super important podcast. Yeah. For all the different questions. And one last thing that I want to recommend is a newsletter, Regenerative Transmission by Ruta. And she has a writing course, which is called Headwaters. She had like 2 cohorts now, and I was part of the first one. And that's about writing, but again, also about unlearning and getting back into like connecting with your authenticity, with your truth, knowing how truth feels in the body, building a system for writing, and then getting into the flow of actually getting it all out. So if you're interested in general and finding your voice again, or like writing and connecting to what feels true, I think this is a great resource in many ways.
Thank you so much for providing those invaluable recommendations. Is there a specific place that our listeners can follow you online other than LinkedIn, which I think they should do because there they can find a lot of the good stuff that you produce? Or where can they follow your work?
Mostly on LinkedIn, honestly, because this is where I've like spent already a lot of time and it takes so much time to write. But LinkedIn. But I want to publish a newsletter very soon. I'm working on this. I promise it's going to be upcoming soon. So you will find out about it on LinkedIn. So everything I do, you will find out about on LinkedIn. But I also have a website, which is also linked on LinkedIn. And I also have an Instagram, which I don't really use. So yeah, but you can find me all over the internet. But if you want to find me on LinkedIn.
That is the place to go. That is just the place to go. Thank you so much for joining us, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much.
It was a real pleasure. And thank you to all our listeners for listening to the first season of Unfolding Strategic Design. Thank you for all the great support on LinkedIn and everywhere else. And remember, in regards to our lovely episode with Alex, tune in, trust your intuition, and take care. If you enjoyed today's episode of Unfolding Strategic Design, make sure to follow us on LinkedIn, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Your support helps us bring in more inspiring voices from the world of strategic design.